and moving from where we left off last time. Uh, I had hit puberty and was a freshman in high school at this point. I started even then. I was pretty quick to already have facial hair. I remember I had this just this one sideburn running along my jaw here uh, that I used to get called out for because I was pretty lazy in general. My face was pretty explosive to say the least when I was at this age. In fact, I had to go see a physician for my face because it was erupt erupting and my hormones were raging so bad. I would just fucking bleed. All my cheeks would be so inflamed from the acne that I would just fucking bleed in class sometimes. So I had the whole whammy of being frumpy and already having a lot of problems with acne. So I got dealt a tough hand there on that one. And as for my education, my grades were starting to get worse and worse because I started to care less and less about academics. Every the minutia of going to school every day for topics that I didn't really care about. But it was around this time that I started to really take up on history in particular. I was always really good at history for whatever the reason may be, and I wanted to understand, and was quite frankly inspired by the heroic tales of the Civil and World War I and World War II that the American education system really hones in on. At least that was true when I was in high school. And as for my Catholic school, I was becoming more and more resentful because I was starting to get into the NFL, and Sundays was obviously the day that the league would play all day, and I wanted to watch it, but I had to go and do this extracurricular Catholic school class that only really my grandma cared about me doing for the sacraments and to be confirmed into the church. Outside of her, nobody. I think most people were pretty secular in my family, if not very receptive to religious ideals now. And so I was getting more and more agitated and irritated at having to do this, and with that, I think also contributed to my intellectual thoughts. At this point, I was already pretty convinced that this was usury, and we were all being co-opted from Logos, and this is just a sky daddy, and this is all just a rib. And around that time, I really genuinely believe I was getting even more upset and agitated because of this worldview. I remember there was a really, really good argument that Thunderfoot had in particular. This is very, very old atheist and theologian YouTube days, and they would reply to each other and give each other arguments. And Thunderfoot, of course, is the scientist. I think he still makes videos even to this day. Was like one of the biggest channels on YouTube at the time for this kind of discourse. And I thought it was really compelling. I thought he was totally knocked it out of the park. And I remember it actually really it really upset me. I remember sitting there being upset. And actually, I probably did cry. I was like 14 or something, 13 or 14. And I discovered intellectual YouTube or so-called intellectual YouTube that I found at the time, or at least the discourse. But in tandem with that, and I think this is really important as well, was about in that same sort of breath, I decided that I really cared about politics and wanted to get into it. The Iraq and Afghanistan war had been continuing. This was about the time where Obama would come out of nowhere, quite literally, and run for president. And, being a young minority kid, obviously I threw my support, even though I couldn't vote, behind '08 Obama. I think it really, it can't be underscored enough how popular Obama actually was, even in this rural white Midwest. And there was some really funny. I remember this guy on election day. He was driving around town, and he had the Barack Hussein Obama. Like, he had this big list and all of these reasons about Obama being a Kenyan socialist, and but there was this kind of message about this apocalyptic, the social order is taking a fall here. And at the time, obviously, I scoffed at it because I was already going towards leftism, and so long after that, I was basically a progressive, or your typical high school Marxist nerd, quite frankly. And, in the meantime, I was also starting to get into music, in particular with hip-hop. And thanks to YouTube, you kind of had access to this underground hip-hop scene that you never would have been able to. I would have had to go to some record store in generations prior to find esoteric hip-hop or conscious hip-hop. I think of Immortal Technique being pretty influential to me at the time. It's kind of funny to consider. I remember a really, really old YouTube video of Alex Jones and Immortal Technique down in New York City together as in the 9/11 truther era. And this kind of allegiance is kind of even funny to discuss now, considering how George Bush is really a friend of the outlets nowadays, when he went up against Donald Trump. And so seeing the great Satan himself from the 2000s era get in bed with the same liberals who were freaking out about him every single day was a pretty interesting thing that I think millennials don't really bring up enough. Excuse me. But in the meantime, I was also playing video games, in particular RuneScape, which my classmates got me hooked onto, and everyone played this fucking game. It was right in the middle of the popularity boom of home internet taking off for our age group, and this game was free. It's a classic MMO. I always liked MMOs because of its freedom and being able to be this kind of character and the storytelling involved. And RuneScape quests are notorious for actually being really well done. And I still play that game to this day. Even spent a lot of my high school and intellectual life with that game going on in the background. Still to this day, even. But somewhere along the way, I started to decide that I wanted to kind of write. I always had a umbrage with writing and wanting to do the author thing. I was told, even when you would do these sort of what suits you best career path-wise, I would always either get told to be a serf or be an author. That's pretty much all I have going for me, is to write or do something along those lines. And then even as a child, comprehension and reading and dissecting text and making your own text was about the only thing that I could really contribute to any degree that would get me high marks. And so as part of this program actually in high school that luckily came along, I had actually flunked my sophomore year because I just didn't give a shit. I was just interested in playing video games and hating life, and being this edgy fedora wearing atheist. And so I was daydreaming and wanting to explore that, but somewhere along the way I got dragged into this program at my high school because I was just slipping. I was just slipping through the cracks, and they would look at my test scores and say, "What's going on, kid? Like, you're not really the results aren't there. We think the intellect is, and anytime we talk to you, we're always impressed by the things you have to say, but you don't participate at all." I was I was always present at school. I never really skipped. I was too much of a wuss to do that. I was afraid of my parents. But I would, just because my presence is there, it doesn't mean that I'm actually there. I would be daydreaming just the whole time. And I had this program though that I got put in that helped me graduate high school and get me into college, because they saw that I had high marks in the testing and for the state, sort of standardized, but the grades never reflected that. But luckily I got into this program, they found me, and I did actually have some one-on-one care for once with some social workers, and this was the closest I ever got in my adolescence to diagnosing my ADHD or alleged. I don't want to brand myself with an illness I may or may not have, but most people would say that met me would attest to this. And he kind of would prod and poke and ask. We would do these kind of meetup things every once in a while. And so he saw how disorganized and kind of erratic I would be, and how much I would move, and all the classic tall tale signs, right, that you would have. So that was kind of an interesting closure to have happen. In the meantime, though, socially, I was actually starting to make more and more acquaintances at school, because I would use my humor to try to get people to leave me the fuck alone, really, for the most part. If I could make the people who were fucking with me laugh, then they mess with me less. And so I would use that, and I kind of understood to some degree that when I actually get to hang out with people or experience them by myself, I have a way of actually being far more charming in that kind of setting than I would otherwise. And I started to be able to kind of strategically figure out when to pick my shots and actually make more acquaintances at school, even though I wasn't really hanging out with anyone. Before high school, I would just never hang out with anyone. I would get offered every once in a while to come do this or that, but I was just too self-absorbed into my own things. I wanted to learn about politics and play video and do stuff like that. I've always been that sort of intuitive loner that my parents told me about for part one, where I was always just running off by myself and hanging out by myself underneath objects or jumping off of things, whatever the case may be. I was always wanting to do my own thing, and that's really stayed true throughout my life. I've come to terms with. But somewhere along the way as well, I started to take up this project outside of school work. I had this blog that I decided to start up because I was not so impressed by trying to write fiction. I tried. I would write short stories and show them to my aunt. She's just always been just so amazing about my the things I would want to do, and how she would be able to help me. This is the aunt that had me reading the classics, of course, during my summer breaks that I mentioned in the last part. So, thank goodness I had her around for all of this, really. And so she would actually edit for me my blog posts, and for a couple months I would just cover politics, and I would go and watch all the networks and form opinions, dog shit opinions, of course, that a 15, 16-year-old, you don't really have anything to contribute. I never worked a day in my fucking life. I was a neat high school kid. So you can think of how vacuous and annoying my politics would have been. But nonetheless, I was still writing, and I think that's what my aunt looked at the most out of it was he's writing, he's exploring his intellectual freedoms, and trying to cultivate something, at least, even if it's pretty crass. And I remember, just the trope of the dirtbag leftist, right? There is something about the vulgarity when you're this leftist man, and you kind of adopt this sort of almost NPC like George Carlin almost attitude that almost every leftist guy I know or teenager has. Like, they have this kind of streak of this edgelordom that I think is pretty interesting. And so the dirtbag leftist always cracked me up when it started to be mentioned in Vogue, because I resonated with that a lot. I was definitely that dirtbag leftist type when I was in high school, for sure, and early college. But as for girls, I continue to absolutely struggle and fall way far behind everyone else. They were going on dates and doing prom and things like that. I was still struggling to even talk to them, and felt totally invisible. I would wear hoodies all year round because of my body dysmorphia. I continued to gain weight, and in particular, I remember there was actually one instance where I got bullied really. I got roasted really hard by this girl in the hallway. I was like leaving my math class, and so when I gain weight, I always gain it in the abdomen. That's just how on my dad's side of the family our weight's distributed. It's the visceral fat, and so I would always gain weight like in my stomach. I never really gained it on my waist or anywhere else on my body, actually. But I was at this point probably 200 pounds, or in that range. The scale just kept going up, and every once in a while I would decide I need to do something about this, and I would try to start running. But just the uncomfortability of even jogging for 5 minutes, because I was just so inactive. And my heartburn was really acting up. My health was really poor in high school. I've come to recollect now. I always had indigestion issues. I was tired all the time, and quite frankly depressed. And I think my worldview contributed to that. This life is meaningless. Life is even a drag itself. There's nothing to this. We're all gonna die. This nihilism, the French intellect. Even when I was 10 years old, I was sitting in church saying, kind of having this nihilistic streak, this questioning of well, that doesn't appeal to my senses. What is the divine even? Is it even worth talking about even? Or wanting to emulate, or this is just a joke. Um, and So that was pretty alienating, actually, to some degree. And In addition to that, I was the Latino kid who didn't speak Spanish. I was very articulate and nerdy, and into the boards and stuff like that. I would be wanting to talk about politics and weird shit and progressivism and all these kind of concepts. So it was very easy for me to just be this outcast. And so high school was a bad time. I was pretty depressed. There's many times where I had to get pick-me-ups from family around me, especially my mother, because I was always a mama's boy and still am, proudly. That I just knew I wasn't fitting in. I knew I was falling behind socially, or had been behind socially for quite some time, and I resented everything around me. I resented life itself. I was very, very upset with who I was and the direction, the lack of direction I had. And it was about 14 or 15. I think that was like the first time that I considered actually killing myself, and wanting to die, and knowing that I was gonna have a short life, because I was just gonna fucking kill myself and take myself out eventually. So I really didn't give a shit about college or anything, despite the fact that I took the ACT. I did really well in the literacy, of course. I was one of the top 2 or 3% of the test takers in the nation for that aspect of it. But in mathematics, I was once again held back by my lack of literacy and frustration and lack of patience to understand these equations. And I think that's why I like Heidegger so much, is he's allergic to math too. So we can both be illiterate in math and be these abstractors, and talk about poetry and shit like that. So yeah, that really wraps up high school, at least. I was not a happy kid at this point. I was delving deeper and deeper into these social issues, deeper into nihilism, deeper into anti-theism. I was starting to pick up on people like Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins and the Four Horsemen of the atheist movement, instead of watching these YouTubers do these sort of arguments with these half-baked Christians on YouTube. I decided to go to the actual people that they were honestly appropriating for their own content anyway, and that was the Four Horsemen at the time, with Sam Harris as well. And so when I graduated high school, I decided that, well, I didn't really decide. I was going to college. I was going to go to the local university. I got in rather easily, and was actually given a pretty generous amount of federal aid, because my family was so poor. I was the first high school graduate on my dad's side of the family, and I don't know, other than my uncle, I don't really think anyone had graduated before me. Everyone had dropped out, and just couldn't handle the system, or felt betrayed in some way by it, and alienated, and would never finish. So yeah, it was, there was kind of this sort of pride that I took up, that it was the culmination of my family's struggles to be able to go to the university in my local city that had always been there for me growing up, or I was always around it. My aunt went there as well, So I was familiar with the school already as it was. Um, and it's honestly a good institute despite my own reservations about academia on its own. I didn't have a terrible time there, but it was pretty obvious that I just did not want to deal with academia and be a part of that sort of life. I just really struggled in classrooms my whole life. And so it really didn't make sense for me to go, honestly, just because I had such a disdainful streak for school in general. I never liked school. Even day one, I remember in kindergarten, I wanted to fucking get out of here, but had to do it. And so, around that time, though, I think it was the summer before I started college, actually, I had finally decided, I want to start to socialize more. I want to make more friends. I want to make memories. I don't want to just sit here with my little stupid political ideas and vacuous intellectual ideas and uh, plans for myself and actually go out and interact with the world and actually be something. And so, naturally, being an 18-year-old, I decided to just go get hammered with a couple of friends that I graduated with in that summer, and I'll never forget. It was Barton's vodka. It was horribly tasting, but we did have some soda to rush it down with. Although at some point that night we decided that we wanted to just take shots of it, and I remember the one of the kids' dads got us the alcohol. It was pretty cool because we were all 18, and the rule was you guys can just do whatever the fuck you want on this property, but just don't leave this property. It was cool with us. So I started to drink with them a little bit, and it was pretty fun. And that was about the time that I discovered that alcohol was kind of this tapping into a superpower of who I really felt I was, because my anxiety and my social aspect of it, and always being really concerned about being judged and my lack of self-esteem would go away from the old liquid courage, and I would start to actually talk with people and make them laugh even. And this was pretty profound to me, so I was hooked. I was like, I want this sauce as much as I can, so I can actually talk to people the way that I always hoped I could. I always wanted to have some sort of attention. I was always jealous of people who were admired and looked up on as peers or other intellectuals even that were smarter than me in my class. I did have this kind of jealous streak of that should be me. I want that for myself. And I think everyone does have that to some extent, no matter how much they try to not be adversarial, because I definitely was that kind of guy who would exude the I'm harmless kind of attitude. But in reality, that wasn't true at all. In fact, I was becoming quite violent in my imagination when I was really peaking in that depressive, lowly period of loneliness. I definitely had some gamer thoughts, and it's pretty startling to consider. And that's, I think, part of the reason why I'm even making this series to begin with. If you're a young man out there who feels alone and doesn't feel like life has any meaning, doesn't feel like there's anything to contribute in the greater community, feels totally invisible, all that kind of shit, right? Fuck it. Don't buy into that. It's a phase. You can't fucking let that mentality win. You can't let that rob you of your life. Um, you can't embrace it, because if you do, it's going to have a profound impact on the things that you decide to do throughout your life. And going around and thinking that you're gonna be dead, or you're just a dead man walking, one, that presumes that you even have the gumption to even do such a thing. And I think one of them, moving on now, it was about this time that my brother was moving along in his early upbringing. Remember, I was 10 years older than him, so I have a way different experience, and there's an age gap there. And so there was a 10-year difference between me and my brother. And one day he got really sick, and we thought, oh, it's a flu. There's nothing to it. But he just kept getting more and more sick. And eventually we had to take him to the hospital. It turned out he was actually going into a state of ketosis from type 1 diabetic complications. So my brother was hospitalized. He had to go across the state to be looked at by a child care facility. And this was really profound for me because I always had this angst and anxiety towards external threats. I didn't want to get beat up at school. I didn't want kids in the neighborhood who were rougher than me to have harm for me. I didn't want the people at my the Protestant church that I lived next to in my childhood house. I didn't want the weird NA people coming into my house in the middle of the night. I was really impulsive about checking doors and all of these external threats. But here comes my brother, and he was like 7 or 8 years old, and he's in the hospital, potentially dying. And that's when I learned about hey, there's threats within. There's threats within your own constitution that can go wrong just on the drop of a dime. And something about that situation really shifted me. It was the first time that I really saw someone close to me harmed in ways that there was no explanation for justice, or there was no external threat that came along and did this to him. If there was environmental factors, or there's genetic factors, of course, in this case, you can't see them, you can't prevent them. It's not like you can just be some bubble boy outside of illness or something like that. You're in this community, you're in this ecology, and so I felt really vulnerable. And so there was kind of a shift from these external threats to eternal threats, and threats of the mind, as my mind kind of was eroding from long-term depressive attitudes and negative energy. I was heavily neurotic and anxious, and that was also about the time, though, that I decided that I wanted to explore poetry and hip hop, because I was doing pretty well in my English courses and whatnot, and I always did sort of like making creative writing, and on the weekends I would go and party and hang out and get just absolutely stupid drunk, to the point where I would puke. I remember one time, I don't even know how I made it home, and this is another thing too. It's amazing how I would even make it home half the time, because I never drove, and everyone else was pretty fucking sloshed at these parties as well. These were 18, 19-year-olds doing this, but in the meantime, I started to want to write more and wanted to get into hip-hop, as all of my friend circle that I was starting to develop did. My friend circle that I mostly made in high school, in the classroom, I started to incorporate myself and hang out with them as I was going to college. Not everyone went to college. For the most part, we were all at university, though. But it was at that time that I did meet who would become my best friend during this stage of my life. And he was very, very similar. He was a white kid. We were both poor as fuck. We were both the oldest of three, so we had this weird connection of really having. We both had a sister and a brother, and there's just this connection that you have, this sort of understanding that you have with someone, because he was always a quiet kid as well. I remember when we were growing up. He was a year younger than me though, and graduated a year after I did. I think he flunked out too, actually, and he was supposed to graduate with us, but he wasn't able to catch up like I was. Like I said, if it wasn't for that program that I got discovered on, I probably would have flunked as well and had to stay an extra year. But nonetheless, this was my sort of compadre who both had an interest in making music together and writing together. And so we would share our poems, or at least songs, whatever you would want to call them, and just share verses all day on social media, on Facebook, and just exchange these writings. And we wanted to best each other, and wanted to become better and better, and wanted to understand hip hop and pick apart its history. And he was always extremely knowledgeable on hip hop, and we really bonded through it, and as did all of my friends in my circle at that time. And one thing is that really helped us, I think, a lot get through hairy situations in our city was we had such a huge group when we would go to parties or whatever. It's there's like 10 of us there, and that would really help us out a lot on not having any issues or having people getting jumped or anything if you were the biggest group there that night. It kind of helped us out a lot not to get messed with, because that was a pretty regular thing in our city, in our age group. And we did actually have these gangsters one night mess with us outside of the liquor store. I was always the one that had the best shot of trying to get liquor if we couldn't get it from an adult. And about at this time, I was starting to really experiment with all sorts of different drugs and alcohol. I was very easily convinced to partake in the alteration of my mind, because I thought it was so fun, because it was just boring every other step of the way. Reality. It's funny. Hitchens actually would talk about smoking and being a boozer, and he would just say that it was just the boredom of life itself, and kind of this pessimism of life that Schopenhauer would talk about as well. So I was, of course, super invested on trying to drink as much as possible, probably too much. My grades in college were terribly mediocre my first year, and I was taking all these different general kind of courses. I definitely loaded up on history, and I was learning basic logic and things of that nature. I hadn't undecided my major, but I wanted to do something in politics or some kind of journalism, since I did that blog for a number of months. And I remember just how it felt when I did make the paper when I was in 5th grade for that sports project, and how good it felt when they draped the paper over in front of me and had my picture in the local paper that day. It felt like I wanted to do something with that in journalism or some sort of writing endeavor. And so I was kind of messing around with things of that nature, and just experimenting with all kinds of different stuff, and getting myself in some hairy situations every once in a while from boozing, because like I said, the mask would come off in a way, and I would actually regretfully become aggressive once in a while from these blackout nights even. And I remember I tried to actually fight my best friend at the time, and luckily he didn't beat me up, because I definitely deserved it. I don't remember. Like I said, I blacked out, but as I've been told, I was pretty irate, and getting in his face and telling him to just fuck me up and fight me, and that is kind of the drawback for alcohol for me. Is like I said, I was so into that idea of me having this superpower of being able to overcome my social anxiety and express myself in the sort of way, and not give a fuck. And but of course, there's the extent of you being absolutely tossed to be able to achieve that, and you're not thinking right when you're doing that. You're underthinking heavily at that point, instead of the overthinking that bugged me. But I needed to find the medium there and do it in a sober way, in a healthy way. So that was a big stain for me. I also got into an actual fight with one of my other friends, and he actually fucking bit me in the chest. And I haven't seen him in a number of years. A lot of these people I've not talked to for reasons we'll get on maybe later. So yeah, from what I remember, I just remember a lot of partying and starting to branch out and socialize, and forming my group of friends that I was going to eventually start making music with and living with as time went on. But unfortunately, as my summer of my first year of college came to an end, we had partied all summer. I decided that I wasn't going to go to my local university again, because I was going to be on probation that time, and the grant money wasn't there for me anymore. I had used up my diversity hire tokens. Of course, I just spent all of this fucking federal money that I got for going to school, because they gave me thousands of dollars, instead of saving it or even using it to pay back my own school. I decided to just, buy marijuana and clothes and just a bunch of vacuous shit like that. Not all of the purchases were bad. I did need to upgrade my wardrobe. It was pretty sad before then, and actually care more about my appearance and who I was. And so that kind of, to a degree, gave me somewhat more of an identity, instead of just kind of being this formless intellectual that really had nothing to offer to anyone. But it was at the end of summer. I'll never forget. I decided to go to a community college and enroll. It was outside of town. So I went there with my dad to go enroll. It was actually already the first day of school. I was already behind from the start. And I was going to do online schooling. And it was a lot cheaper than the other university. So I decided to enroll there. I continued my kind of no path, but ultimately kind of, general education forward in my second year of college. Now, because I had to do that, I decided not to be a party animal that night before, so I didn't hang out with anyone, which was pretty rare for me at the time. I was really big on getting out of the house as much as I could. I was super into that. So I came back from that, and I got a call from my best friend. We had fought a couple weeks earlier, like I said, about that drunken exchange, but of course he forgave me because he was a good friend, a great friend, um, who understood that I was just tossed that night. And he called, and something was not right. He didn't sound right to me. And uh, I knew I knew something was off. He didn't sound right. He didn't really explain much other than that he was at this party last night, and it was a number that I never had seen before. That he called me on, and he told me he was calling me from his sister's phone. He was at his house, and his car was banged up, and he had lost his phone, and it was obviously getting under his skin. And but he sounded just so out of it, and eventually just said that he was going to mess with his car a little bit, and he would hit me up later. And I said, "All right, dude, I'll see you later." And I hung up, and not much time must have went by, but I got a call from my other best friend at the time. He was a Latino. We were really racially diverse group of friends. We were all poor, but we all had different sorts of makeup of this kind of Americana melting pot in the Midwest. Um, he called me up, and he said there's a lot of cops over at our friend's house. He lived. There's only a house in between them. They lived with each other their whole lives, and actually my other friend, the white friend, he had even taught him how to speak English. Really, he helped him tremendously. They were lifelong friends. They were literal brothers in this neighborhood, even though I lived like kind of across town. And he's told me that there's a lot of cops, and something had happened at his house. And I was like, that's strange, because I just talked to him maybe an hour or two ago. Um, but I did say, like, it did seem kind of like a weird conversation. It wasn't anything that I had ever really experienced with him before. So we were kind of wondering, what the fuck had happened. And I think he had just gotten off work or something, so that's why he was wondering, what was going on. So we decided to meet up and kind of wait out on what was going on over there. And I remember we were just sitting outside of their house, or their houses, after he had came and got me, and we went back, and there was nobody around. And then we had an acquaintance that was kind of a mutual friend, but we didn't really hang out with him. He didn't hang out with us. He didn't like us very much. He just drove up with his head kind of outside the door, and he said that we needed to go to the hospital right now because my friend had shot himself. I don't remember if he had necessarily said that he had shot himself right then and there, but we were going to the hospital, and it wasn't good. And when we got there, we discovered that he was just hanging on by the machines. He was gonna pass. It was just totally up to when to pull the plug, and so we were all just kind of assembled around to say our goodbyes. And I remember I kind of regret doing this, but me and who would later become my another close friend of mine, although we were already friends enough to do this with each other anyway, but we weren't really close yet. And we decided to try to go find his phone. And so after, I couldn't really look at what had happened. It was just so profound, and I couldn't really look over at his way. I just kind of sat there and kept my head down as everyone else grieved. And I remember I decided that I wanted to go try to help get his phone to try to get away from this. And so we left the hospital, and during that time, one of my other friends did a sort of eulogy for our friend as he laid there on the life support. And it's long been discussed, and everyone that was there says that they saw a tear form in his eye and run down his face. And that always affected me too, hearing about that story, because there's a lot of nights during our friendship where I would take things to the extreme, and I would play my hand, sort of, so to speak, and I would say some crazy shit about ending my own life. And I remember the closest I got was I was gonna take a bunch of these pills that I bought. And I don't know if they would have killed me, honestly. I can't remember how much there was, but I was drunk out of my mind anyway. It probably wouldn't have killed me. I was doing so many things then that it was honestly probably just another day for me in retrospect. But nonetheless, I was being a real piece of work, and he would be the one to call me and talk me out of it. And he definitely, he had his concerns and his troubles that he would share with me about reservations of how his family was sticking together. And he had a girlfriend that ended up going south with, and he kind of bottled that up. He never really discussed it much, but it obviously had a profound impact on him. It was his first girlfriend, and they broke up at the time. And it just came out of nowhere. And I remember the guilt and the shame that I felt from really not being able to help my friend get through this. And I took a lot of blame onto myself for him not being here. So that was my first day of enrollment in my second year of college. I think I'm gonna end it here. This is about age 19, so I think at the start of my next video we'll kind of have to go from like 19 to 20ish through present day today, and because this is almost an hour long episode now. 14 to 21 is the cycle that everyone says that's the eventful one, and it's damn true. There's a lot to unpack here, a lot of change for me as I went from this loner, shy kid to being a street kid, and trying to balance college with that. And for the next for part 4, we'll see is when I start to fall in love and meet my own girlfriend at the time. And so we'll go over that and look at that. But thanks for watching, guys.